What happened to you? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing by Bruce D. Perry, MD, PhD. And Oprah Winfrey. Introduction. Imagine a quiet street on a pleasant evening. The sun is setting, people are heading home from work. Suddenly, a motorcycle backfires, a sharp, cracking sound that echoes for a split second. Most people might jump, maybe look around, and then go on with their day. But for one man, a kind, funny, elderly gentleman named Mike, that sound was a declaration of war. In an instant, he wasn't on a peaceful city street anymore. He was back in a foxhole in Korea, decades ago. He dove for cover between parked cars, hands over his head, heart pounding, convinced he was under fire. His partner, Sally, stood there in shock as the man she loved transformed before her eyes, screaming and terrified. Later, sitting in a therapist's office, confused and ashamed, Mike asked a question that so many of us have asked ourselves at some point in our lives. A question born from pain and confusion. He pleaded, "What's wrong with me?" This is a question we ask when our reactions don't make sense, when our habits sabotage us, when we feel broken in ways we can't explain. We look in the mirror and wonder, why am I like this? But what if that's the wrong question entirely? Today, we're going to explore a book that proposes a simple but revolutionary shift in perspective. A book born from over 30 years of conversations between two remarkable minds, Oprah Winfrey, a global media leader who has listened to the stories of over 50,000 people, and Drive. Bruce D. Perry, a pioneering child psychiatrist and neuroscientist. Their book, What Happened to You?, isn't just a bestseller that has sold millions of copies, it's a guide to understanding the deepest parts of ourselves. This isn't just a book about trauma. It's a book about how every single one of us is shaped by our experiences, from the moment we are born. It's a book that trades judgment for compassion. And it does so by replacing that painful question, "What's wrong with you?" with a far more powerful and healing one. What happened to you? By the end of our time together today, you will understand not just why Mike dove for cover on that street, but why you do the things you do. You'll understand how your past is quietly shaping your present, and you'll discover the secret to not just coping with your history, but transforming it into your greatest source of wisdom and strength. This is more than a book summary, it's a journey into the heart of who you are. Book summary. Let's go back to Mike, the Korean War veteran, huddled between those parked cars. His reaction seems completely irrational. The war was over 30 years ago. Why would his body and mind react as if it were happening right now? Drive. Perry, who was a young psychiatrist at the time, didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. The problem wasn't in Mike's character, it was in his brain. And to understand the brain, we have to start at the beginning. Imagine the brain is built like an upside-down pyramid, or a 4-layer cake. At the very bottom, you have the most primitive part, the brainstem. Think of it as the reptilian brain. It's the part that keeps you alive. It controls your heart rate, your breathing, your body temperature. It doesn't think, it doesn't plan, and most importantly, it has no concept of time. It lives purely in the present moment, reacting to the world. Just above that is the midbrain, which helps manage arousal and sleep. Then comes the limbic system. This is the emotional center. It's where we process feelings like love, connection, and fear. And finally, at the very top, is the big, wrinkly part we all recognize, the cortex. This is the smart part of our brain. It's responsible for abstract thought, language, planning, and our values. The cortex is the only part of the brain that can understand time. It knows the difference between 30 years ago and right now. Here is the crucial lesson. Every single piece of information you receive from the world, every sight, sound, smell, and touch, doesn't go directly to your smart cortex. It has to travel from the bottom up. It enters through the primitive, reactive brainstem first. This means that for every single experience, you feel and react before you think. So, when that motorcycle backfired, the sound entered Mike's ears and traveled straight to his brainstem. That primitive part of his brain didn't think, "Oh, that sounds a bit like gunfire from the war I fought decades ago." No. It instantly matched the sound pattern to a deeply stored memory, the sound of real gunfire, a signal of life or death danger. And because the brainstem can't tell time, it didn't know Korea was over. It thought, "We are under attack, right now." It immediately triggered a massive stress response. It hijacked his body, flooding it with adrenaline, raising his heart rate, and forcing him to dive for cover. Only later, after the initial storm of reaction, did the signal finally make its way up to his cortex, the thinking part of his brain, which could then say, "Wait a minute. That was just a motorcycle. We're safe." But by then, the damage was done. The reaction had already happened. Mike wasn't crazy. His brain was simply doing exactly what it had been trained to do to keep him alive. What was once an adaptive, life-saving response in a war zone had become a maladaptive, life-disrupting response in a peaceful city. This one story reveals the first profound secret of the book. Seemingly senseless behavior begins to make perfect sense once you understand what's happening beneath the surface, inside the brain. And this process of the brain making sense of the world begins long before we can even speak. Oprah shares her own powerful story. She recalls being a very young child, living with her grandparents in rural Mississippi in a home without indoor plumbing. One Sunday morning, she was sent to the well to pump drinking water. As a child would, she innocently dipped her fingers in the water, just daydreaming. Her grandmother saw this and became enraged. She whipped Oprah so violently that blood seeped through her white Sunday dress. Livid at the sight of the blood on the dress, she punished her again before sending her off to church. Oprah says, "Even at 3 years old, I knew that what I was experiencing was wrong." She was beaten for the smallest things: spilling water, breaking a glass, not being quiet. Afterwards, she was often told to wipe that pout off her face and smile. To bury it as though it never happened. What does this do to a developing brain? Every moment of our lives, our brain is creating a personal codebook or a worldview. It's connecting sights, sounds, smells, and feelings to build a map of how the world works. For one child, a gentle touch and eye contact might be coded as, "I am safe. I am loved." For another child, that same eye contact might precede a yelling match or a blow. For them, eye contact gets coded as, "Danger is coming. Prepare yourself." Oprah's brain learned a powerful set of rules. It learned that to survive, she needed to become a world-class people pleaser. She learned that hushing her mouth and burying her feelings was the only way to end the pain. This conditioned compliance, as she calls it, would define her relationships for the next 40 years. It took her half a lifetime to learn how to set boundaries and say no with confidence, because her early experiences had wired her brain to believe that her own needs were secondary to the approval of others. The experiences of our first few years are disproportionately powerful because that is when the brain is growing most rapidly, making thousands of new connections every second. Drive. Perry explains that a newborn baby's brain will create more neural connections in the first year of life than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. The foundation of your entire personality, your emotional responses, and your view of the world is laid down before you can even form a complete sentence. This brings us to one of the most important, and often misunderstood, aspects of memory. We tend to think of memory as a story we can tell: who, what, when, where. This is what's called narrative memory, and it's stored in the cortex, the smart part of our brain. But children under the age of 3 haven't fully developed the neural networks for this kind of memory. That doesn't mean they don't remember. It means they remember in a different way. Their experiences are stored in the lower parts of the brain as emotional and sensory memories. Think about it. A certain song comes on the radio and you're instantly filled with a feeling of nostalgia or sadness, even if you can't remember the specific time you first heard it. The smell of freshly baked bread might make you feel a warmth and comfort that traces back to a grandmother's kitchen you can't consciously picture. These are memories stored not as stories, but as feelings and sensations. Now, imagine what happens when those early, nonverbal memories are tied to trauma. A child who is abused may not have a story to tell about it, but their brain has stored the abuser's tone of voice, the scent of their cologne, or the music playing in the background as a powerful threat signal. Years later, as an adult, they might meet someone with a similar tone of voice and feel an instant, inexplicable panic. They have no idea why. Their conscious mind has no story to connect it to, but their brainstem is screaming, "Danger." This explains so much about our gut feelings or first impressions of people. When we meet someone new, our brain is rapidly scanning them for familiar cues. If they have attributes, a way of smiling, a vocal tone, a scent, that match something positive in our codebook, we get a good feeling. We think, "I like this person." If they match something negative, we feel uneasy, and we don't know why. This is what happened with a boy named Samuel. Sam had been removed from a home where his father was a violent alcoholic. He spent years in the foster care system but was finally making progress at a residential treatment center. He was a good kid, but he was years behind in school. When he finally caught up and was moved to a new classroom, things fell apart. His new teacher was a kind, energetic, experienced man. But from the first day, Sam was agitated and aggressive towards him. He had explosive outbursts that were completely out of character. The staff was baffled. The teacher, feeling attacked, began to withdraw. Sam, feeling rejected, became sullen and ashamed. His only explanation was, "He hates me." Drive. Perry couldn't figure it out. He observed the classroom and saw nothing wrong. The only clue was that Sam's agitation got worse the closer the teacher got to him. The answer came during a supervised visit with Sam's biological father. As they sat playing checkers, Drive. Perry noticed a familiar scent in the air, Old Spice aftershave. It was the same scent his own father used to wear, and it filled him with a warm, comforting feeling of safety and love. He realized Sam's father was wearing it, likely to cover the smell of alcohol. A light bulb went off. He went to see Sam's new teacher and asked a strange question. "What kind of deodorant do you use?" The answer? Old Spice. For Drive. Perry, the scent of Old Spice was an evocative cue linked to love and safety. For Sam, that same scent was unconsciously linked to years of terror and violence at the hands of his father. His brain didn't know the difference between the teacher and his father. It only knew that this scent meant danger. The teacher switched to an unscented deodorant. Drive. Perry explained to Sam what was happening in his brain. The change was almost immediate. Over the next year, Sam and his teacher developed a strong, positive relationship, and Sam became a model student. He hadn't been a bad kid. His brain was just reacting to a hidden trigger from his past. This raises a fundamental question. If our brains are so powerfully shaped by our past, what keeps us from being trapped in these cycles of reaction forever? The answer lies in the concept of regulation. Our bodies and brains are constantly striving for balance, or what scientists call homeostasis. When you're hungry, your body is out of balance. You eat, and you return to balance. When you're cold, you put on a sweater and return to balance. This return to balance feels good. In fact, drive. Perry says that the relief of distress, getting back into balance, is one of the most powerful rewards for the brain. When a baby cries, it's a signal that they are dysregulated. They're out of balance. They might be hungry, cold, or scared. Since they can't regulate themselves, they rely on a caregiver to provide external regulation. The caregiver comes, feeds them, holds them, or soothes them, and the baby returns to a state of balance. And what is one of the most powerful ways we regulate a distressed baby? Rhythm. We rock them. We walk with them. We sing to them. Why? Because rhythm is the native language of the brainstem. Before we are born, we spend 9 months floating in a world dominated by the rhythmic beat of our mother's heart, around 60 to 80 beats per minute. That rhythm becomes deeply associated with safety, warmth, and nourishment. After birth, rhythmic sounds and movements activate those primal memories of safety and calm us down. This is why a walk in nature, the sound of waves on a beach, listening to music, or dancing can be so incredibly calming. Rhythm is regulating. When a caregiver lovingly responds to a crying infant, something magical happens in the brain. The infant not only feels the pleasure of being regulated, but they also experience the sight, smell, touch, and sound of a human being. The brain begins to weave these three things together: regulation, relationship, and reward. In thousands of these small moments, the infant's brain learns a foundational lesson: connection with another person is a source of safety and pleasure. This builds the root system for what drive. Perry calls the tree of regulation. A child who receives consistent, loving, and responsive care develops an internal worldview that people are good, safe, and predictable. But what happens when that care is inconsistent, chaotic, or absent? Imagine a baby whose cries are sometimes met with a warm embrace, sometimes with angry shouting, and sometimes with nothing at all. This unpredictable pattern of stress does something very different to the brain. Instead of building resilience, it sensitizes the stress response systems. Think of it like this: a healthy stress response is like a well-tuned smoke alarm. It goes off when there's real danger, and it's quiet the rest of the time. But a sensitized stress response is like a faulty smoke alarm that goes off every time you make toast. It's overactive and overly reactive. The person lives in a constant, low-level state of alarm. They are hyper-vigilant, always scanning for threats. Drive. Perry describes this as an internal storm. The comedian and actor Russell Brand, who struggled for years with addiction, described it perfectly. He said, "Drugs and alcohol are not my problem. Reality is my problem. Drugs and alcohol are my solution." For many people who have experienced developmental trauma, their baseline state is one of chronic dysregulation. They feel like they are jumping out of their skin. So when they discover a substance or a behavior, like drugs, alcohol, food, or even self-harm like cutting, that can quiet that internal storm, the relief is incredibly powerful. The pull to go back and use it again is immense. They aren't just seeking pleasure, they are desperately seeking regulation. They are trying to self-medicate the pain of a dysregulated brain. This is where we see the profound difference between trauma and neglect. Trauma is what happens to you. Neglect is what doesn't happen for you. Drive. Perry tells the story of two 12-year-old boys at a residential treatment center, Thomas and James. On paper, they looked identical. Both had been through multiple foster homes, both struggled in school, and both had the same psychiatric labels: ADHD, depression, conduct disorder. But in person, they felt completely different. Thomas had been physically abused by a rageful father. But he also had a loving mother, aunt, and grandmother who, while they couldn't always protect him, provided a buffer of affection. When you sat with Thomas, despite his hyperactivity and mood swings, you could feel his desire to connect. His relational neurobiology was relatively healthy. With therapy focused on relationships, he began to heal and thrive. James, on the other hand, felt like an emotional ghost. There was no history of overt abuse. His mother had disappeared when he was an infant, and he was raised by a grandmother who was bitter and disengaged. He received physical care, food, shelter, but very little loving interaction. He never had those thousands of moments where his brain could wire together regulation, relationship, and reward. His tree of regulation had no roots. What James experienced was profound neglect. His brain hadn't learned that people are a source of comfort. For him, people were unreliable, they disappear. So he never learned to trust or connect. He grew up emotionally empty. Drive. Perry realized that neglect is as toxic as trauma. Trauma can sensitize your stress response, leaving you in a constant state of fear. But neglect can leave you with an underdeveloped capacity to love and connect, which is arguably even more devastating. You can't give what you didn't get. This leads us to the body's two major defense systems when faced with a threat. We're all familiar with the first one, the arousal response, better known as fight or flight. When you perceive a threat, your brain prepares you to either fight it or run away. Your heart rate increases, adrenaline pumps through your body, and your focus narrows to the threat. But what happens when you're a small child and you can't fight or run away? What if the threat is inescapable, like an abusive parent or a neglectful environment? In that case, the brain uses a very different strategy, the dissociative response. Instead of preparing for external action, the body prepares for injury. Your heart rate goes down. Your body releases its own natural painkillers, like opioids. And most profoundly, you mentally check out. You psychologically flee into your inner world. Time seems to slow down. You might feel like you're watching a movie of your own life, or even floating outside your body. This is what happens when people describe an out-of-body experience during a traumatic event. It's an incredibly powerful survival mechanism. Because you cannot physically flee, you psychologically flee. For infants and young children, dissociation is often the primary adaptive strategy. Over time, a child who lives in an environment of inescapable chaos learns to retreat to that inner world at the slightest sign of stress. This can become their default coping mechanism. This continuum of dissociation explains so many behaviors. At the mild end, it's simply avoiding conflict or being a people pleaser, trying to keep everyone happy to prevent a threat from emerging. As the perceived threat increases, it becomes compliance, going through the motions of what's asked of you, but without any real emotional engagement. Further down the line, it's the full-blown dissociative state where you feel disconnected from your body. And at its most extreme, it can lead to behaviors like cutting. As we discussed, a person with a sensitized dissociative response releases a large amount of their body's own opioids when they cut themselves. It doesn't hurt, it's soothing. It's a powerful and immediate way to regulate an overwhelming internal storm. Oprah realized that her own people-pleasing was a form of this dissociative coping. But she also realized that the ability to dissociate, when controlled, is a superpower. It's the ability to daydream, to reflect, to think creatively, to be in the zone. It's what allowed her to escape her grandmother's farm through books and imagine a different life for herself. The key is moving from being a victim of this response to being the master of it. This brings us to a baffling and painful question. Why do people who have been victims of trauma so often find themselves in abusive relationships as adults? The answer is both simple and profound. We are drawn to what is familiar. Your brain's primary job is not to make you happy, it's to keep you alive. And one of the ways it does that is by making sure the world is predictable. Your brain wants to confirm that its codebook, its worldview, is correct. If your early life was filled with chaos, unpredictability, and threat, your brain organized itself around that reality. Calm, stable, and nurturing environments feel unfamiliar. And the unknown feels dangerous. As the psychologist Virginia Satir put it, we often prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty. So, a person raised in chaos may feel deeply uncomfortable in a healthy, loving relationship. The stability feels wrong. Unconsciously, they might start to provoke conflict, to push buttons, to try and elicit a familiar, chaotic response. When their partner finally gets angry and yells, a strange thing happens. While it's painful, on a deep, neurological level, it's also validating. The brain says, "Ah, yes. This is how the world works. I understand this." This is not a conscious choice. It's a powerful, unconscious pull toward the familiar. Breaking this cycle requires recognizing the pattern. It's about seeing that the problem showing up in your life, whether it's an abusive partner, a domineering boss, or a toxic friend, is often the same problem, just wearing a different pair of pants. So, if our brains are so deeply wired by these early experiences, is change even possible? Can we heal? The answer is a resounding yes. The brain is malleable throughout our entire lives. But healing isn't about erasing the past. You can't just delete old memories. Drive. Perry uses a wonderful analogy. Healing is like building a 4-lane freeway next to an old, bumpy dirt road. The dirt road is still there, but you build a new, healthier, more efficient pathway. Over time, the freeway becomes your new default. And how do we build this freeway? It comes back to the core principles we've been discussing. Healing has to happen in the same sequence that the brain develops, from the bottom up. You can't reason someone out of a trauma that's stored in the lower, non-verbal parts of their brain. You must first regulate, then relate, then reason. This is the most critical takeaway of the entire book. If someone is dysregulated, panicked, angry, or shut down, trying to talk to them, reason with them, or tell them to calm down is useless. Their cortex, the thinking part of their brain, is offline. The first step is always to help them regulate. And the most powerful way to do that is through rhythmic, somatosensory activities. Go for a walk. Listen to music. Breathe together. Play catch. Even just being a calm, present presence can help them catch your calm through emotional contagion. Once they are regulated, you can move to the next step, relate. This is about connection. Feeling seen, heard, and validated. This isn't about giving advice, it's about being present and creating a sense of safety. Only after a person is regulated and feels connected can you begin to reason. Only then is their cortex back online and able to process information, reflect, and learn. This sequence applies to everything: parenting a frustrated child, helping a grieving friend, teaching a student, or even navigating a disagreement with a partner. This healing process doesn't just happen in a therapist's office. In fact, drive. Perry argues that most healing happens in small therapeutic doses throughout our day, within a community of caring people. Think about a time you had a bad day at work. You didn't sit down for a 1-hour session to process it. You called a friend and talked for 5 minutes. Later, you vented to your partner. The next day, you had a quick chat with a trusted colleague. Each of these brief, controllable interactions helped you regulate your feelings and make sense of the experience. This collection of relationships is what drive. Perry calls your therapeutic web. For thousands of years, this is how humans healed. We lived in small, intergenerational clans. There were no therapists, but there was deep community. Healing was woven into the fabric of daily life through connection, regulating rhythms like dance and drumming, and shared stories that gave meaning to suffering. The tragedy of the modern world, as the authors see it, is that we are living in a state of relational poverty. We are more disconnected than ever before. We live in smaller households, we have fewer deep friendships, and we spend, on average, over 11 hours a day in front of screens. This disconnection is a form of social and emotional starvation. And it's making us more anxious, more depressed, and less resilient. This disconnection also fuels our biases. As we've discussed, our brains are wired to be wary of the unfamiliar. If we grow up in a homogeneous environment, with our only exposure to people of different races or cultures coming from distorted media portrayals, our brains will create biased and often racist associations. These biases are not necessarily stored in our cortex with our conscious beliefs. They are often implicit, stored in the lower, reactive parts of our brain. This is why a person can sincerely believe they are not racist, yet still react with fear or suspicion when encountering someone of a different race. Under stress, the cortex goes offline, and these deeply ingrained, implicit biases can take over. The only way to build a new freeway, to create new, healthier associations, is through real, meaningful relationships with people who are different from us. You can't attend a 3-hour sensitivity training and fix implicit bias. You have to build connections. In the end, this book is a powerful call to return to this fundamental human need for connection. It asks us to look at ourselves and others with a new lens of compassion. When we see someone acting out, struggling with addiction, or failing in their relationships, we can stop ourselves from judging them. We can pause, and we can wonder. We can ask the question that opens the door to understanding, to empathy, and ultimately, to healing. What happened to you? Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through What Happened to You, what strikes me most is how this book gives us a language for things we have always felt but could never name. It takes the confusing, messy, and often painful reality of being human and provides a clear and compassionate map. The central idea, shifting from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, is more than just a clever turn of phrase. It's a profound act of grace. It's a way of looking at yourself and others that replaces shame with curiosity, and judgment with empathy. It's the recognition that our behaviors are not a reflection of a flawed character, but a logical adaptation to the world we have experienced. The most powerful and hopeful lesson from this book is that our past does not have to be our prison. While our experiences shape us, they do not have to define our future. The brain's incredible malleability means that healing is always possible. We have the capacity to build new freeways, to create new defaults, to rewrite our story. But the book makes it clear that this healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in connection. It happens when we are seen, heard, and held in a community of caring people. In a world that feels increasingly fragmented and lonely, this message is more vital than ever. The antidote to trauma is not just therapy, it's belonging. It's finding your church home, as Oprah calls it, your people, your tribe. So, how can we apply this wisdom to our own lives, starting today? Here are a few simple actions. First, practice self-compassion. The next time you find yourself repeating a negative pattern or reacting in a way you regret, try to pause. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" gently ask yourself, "I wonder what happened to me that makes me feel or act this way." This small shift can begin to untangle the knots of self-blame. Second, prioritize regulation. Recognize when you are feeling dysregulated, stressed, anxious, or angry. Before you try to think your way out of it, do something to regulate your body first. Take a 10-minute walk. Put on a song you love and dance. Take a few slow, deep breaths. Remember the sequence: regulate, relate, reason. You cannot access your best self until your body feels safe. And finally, extend this understanding to others. The next time someone in your life is acting in a way that is frustrating or confusing, try to see them through this new lens. Wonder about their story. Wonder what happened to them. You don't have to condone their behavior, but approaching them with curiosity instead of judgment can transform the entire interaction. It's a gift you can give them, and it's a gift you can give yourself. That was a summary of What Happened to You? By Drive. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. We've explored the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the major cities and highways, but it can never replace the experience of actually walking the ancient streets, breathing the air, and meeting the people. The real magic of this book happens when you read it yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with a part of your own story you had long forgotten. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself, your past, and your place in the world. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that this work is making a difference, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.